Alan, I need you to go back to Earth and bring Invincible here. He is the key to turning the tide of this war.
We are here talking Season 2, Part 2, Episode 5 of... As we immediately pick up after Mark was given the orders by General Creed to prepare Earth for the takeover of the Viltrumites, we see Mark looks over the devastation left on Thraxa. Now, just before Mark passes out, the look on his face made me think that he has some sense of deja vu for what happened to him after surviving the fight with his father and seeing the destruction left in Chicago back in the Season 1 finale. Now, Mark is helped by Thraxans and finds his newly found stepmother and his little brother are okay. As Andressa gives him a pick-me-up and lets him know that even though he blames himself and his father's presence on this planet, she reminds him that if he wasn't there, they wouldn't have survived. As we see time has passed and we see Mark is healed and he's helping to rebuild. As we see Nuazad has aged and lets Mark know that they have prepared a ship for him to return home. But Mark wants to continue to stick around and help as he believes his absence from Earth is fine because they've got heroes to protect them. As we quickly cut to Earth, we meet...
Behold! The might of Omnipotence!
Who appeared in Invincible issues 27 and 87, and in the comics, he's over 12 feet tall and weighs over 2,800 pounds and has super strength and known as a destroyer of worlds and has the ability to control matter and manipulate reality. Now, initially when I saw this scene, I thought to myself, this must be taking place in another universe or sometime in the future because it's not just the Guardians of the Globe that are facing against him, but we notice that there are other heroes that we haven't even met yet, and some of them belong to the Capes Inc. But then if you look behind Immortal, you'll see that Shrinking Ray and Kate, who we know what happens to them later in this episode, so this must be a flashback to when Invincible wasn't on Earth. Or are we witnessing the power of
Might of Omnipotence!
Reality manipulation in play? Now, Andressa wants Mark to return to Earth against his wishes to stay and help, as she also wants him to take his little brother with him because her days are numbered and she doesn't want him to grow up with everyone around him dead or close to dying. Now, we know that Mark's little brother will grow much quicker than humans, so I wonder if we'll see him age up and become a teenager or an adult by the end of this season. Now, back on Earth, we catch up with Debbie and we see she's back at work and she seems to be getting better. Now, as she's opening up a bottle of wine, Mark arrives and we learn that it's been 2 months since he's been gone. Now, obviously, Debbie is happy to see that her son is safe and back on Earth, but she also meets his brother and she finds out that Nolan's alive. Now, Mark explains everything, and Debbie hasn't forgotten what Nolan has done, but the question is, what are they going to do with Mark's little brother? As we see, Mark suggests that maybe he take a year off of school to look after his little brother, and they really can't seem to figure out what's best for this little guy, but we see Debbie agrees to take time off to help figure things out. Now, this is a perfect example how Nolan's past decisions still affect Debbie and Mark. Just when they both were trying to find some sense of normalcy, Mark going to school, Debbie going back to work, they still have to clean up Nolan's mess. Now, taking a look at this scene, I will admit that I don't think Debbie's fully committed in accepting this current situation of taking over Nolan's newborn child, but remembering her journey in part 1 and also remembering that she almost took her own life, I was expecting a little bit more of a pushback from her welcoming Nolan's new son, but also learning that he created a new family. So narratively speaking, I really hope that part 2 doesn't just leave her with babysitting duties, but I'm also very curious to know that if Mark mentioned the deadline that he has to prepare Earth for the oncoming invasion takeover by the Viltrumites. As we check in with Cecil, Donald is determined to get more details on his discoveries of part 1, and he requests that everyone leaves the room. Now, Cecil initially begins to set up more lies, but eventually takes Donald into the White Room and shows him a section of the room that he's never seen before, and he shows him what they did to him. As we see the state-of-the-art cyborg laying on the table, we learn that Nolan's body actually shielded Donald from most of that explosion and that his brain was still attached, but the rest of his body wasn't able to be salvaged. Now, Cecil tells Donald that he's a better version of himself now, and more importantly, he's alive. But Donald isn't happy to learn the truth, but there's no time to argue as there's bigger fish to fry as they learn the return of Invincible. Now, this reveal obviously sticks with Donald throughout this episode, and I wonder what this will do to his mental state moving forward. Will we see him use his newfound abilities to fight alongside with the heroes, or will he push back and hate what was done to him and become something else? As Mark pays a visit to his best friend William in their dorm room and gives him a quick wiki on what he's been up to the last 2 months, but unfortunately this conversation is cut short because he has to catch up with his girlfriend Amber. As Mark heads her way, he gets interrupted by Cecil. Now, Cecil reminds him of their past agreement as Mark tells him that he knew that Earth was going to be just fine while he was gone. And yet again, we quickly cut back to the Guardians going against this destroyer of worlds, and we see that they're getting their asses handed to them. Now, Cecil tells Mark that the Guardians almost died while Mark was gone, and I'm assuming he's referring to that fight again against this world destroyer and ultimately defeating him. I'm very curious if we'll see more of that story later down the road. Now, Mark finds out that Cecil overheard the news about what he's been up to last few months because he's been keeping tabs on Debbie at her house. Cecil tells Mark that the crew is on their way to pick up his little brother, but Mark convinces him to call them off, at least for now, as we see Mark finally making his way to Amber and telling her everything that happened to him. Now, while he was off in space, we learned that things weren't going great for Amber. She failed one of her tests, she actually lost her grandfather, all while lying about what Mark was up to. Now, we know that their relationship has been a lot better compared to season 1, and it seems like Amber is accepting him as a hero, but I have a feeling that things will eventually change. I say that because Amber doesn't really get to share her experiences the last few months. Again, failing tests, losing her grandfather, having her boyfriend going off to space for months at a time. I really am curious on what arc we're going to see with Amber going through to the remainder of these episodes, and I'm very curious to know if Mark and Amber will remain to be a couple at the end of this season. Now, we catch up with the Guardians who are training, but Immortal isn't impressed, which is very ironic considering what's going to happen to some of these members later in this episode. See Rudy speaking on the behalf of Monster Girl about her training affecting her transformation and her getting younger, but Monster Girl confronts him about this, and there seems to be some type of tension between them as she brings up that their last date might be the last time they go on one if he continues to speak up for her. Now, I'll speak to this a little bit later in the breakdown, but the 2 months that have passed, it seems like we've gotten some off-screen development that I would have liked to have seen. We see Cecil pops up and fills them in on an incoming ship coming from Mars. Now, Shapesmith's identity is revealed in this scene, and he's surprised to find out that Cecil and half of the Guardians already knew a little bit about him, but he goes into more detail about how he came to Earth, but more importantly, we get a little bit more of his backstory, as he tells them that the human astronaut Russ, who we've known is now the host hive mind, is headed to Earth. As the team sets up their lineup for Earth's defense, we see that Rex gets an idea that involves Eve. As we see Eve, who's living with her parents again, and you can just tell that she's not the happiest as she once was when she was a hero saving people's lives, as she finds Rex in her room. We see that she's still been dealing with what happened to the building in Chicago and her time of being a solo hero and trying to make a change, and how every time she feels she tries to help, she ends up causing more problems. But for the first time, we see Rex giving her a little bit of a wake-up call that everyone messes up and that she's always found a way to get through it. No matter what she's went through, she's always found a way to save countless lives. As Rex eventually asks her for a favor, which is helping the incoming invasion. Now we see Debbie is playing stepmother to Mark's little brother as she tries to feed him food. We see Mark learns that Debbie did get rid of his father's books, the same books that Nolan wanted him to read, as Cecil arrives to tell Mark what's coming. Now, while Mark is getting suited up, we see Cecil makes a pitch for him to take care of Nolan's son, which we see her and Mark say that they can handle the situation alone, but as they leave, we see this look on Debbie's face. To me, this was a look of her maybe being open to his idea of offering to take care of Nolan's son. Now, I can see this going a couple different ways. One, I can see Debbie maybe taking up the offer on Cecil and giving up Mark's little brother, but then also I can see Debbie, because she's such a nice person, her and Mark take care of him, and we see maybe Nolan escaping the Viltrumites, making his way back to Earth, and we're going to see a reunion between Debbie and Nolan while she's taking care of his son. As it's time for the mission on Mars, we see the team is set with the Guardians consisting of Immortal, Shapeshift, Bulletproof, Black Samson, Monster Girl, Ruby, and additions of Invincible and Eve, leaving Rex in charge as the ranking Guardian, and he couldn't predict what's going to happen next.
Monitor other threats while they're gone.
Oh, sure. Like there's gonna be 2 huge world-shattering emergencies at the same time. Oh no! I'd like to see that, Ray.
Meanwhile, we see the Lizard League in action as they take over a facility that's in possession of what seems to be some nuclear weapons, as this leaves the remaining Guardians to respond. Now in space, we see Shapeshift badly providing intel on what to expect, but it's too late as their ship is under attack, leaving Eve to create a protective shield for them as they enter the ship. Now we see the Earth Guardians battling against the Lizards, Kate, Rex, and Ray, as they're putting up somewhat of a good fight, but unfortunately their training didn't pay off, as we see Kate's duplicates getting killed off one by one, and eventually leaving her by herself to fight, but unfortunately she's brutally killed. We see Ray manages to kill Salamander, but gets eaten by the Komodo dragon, leaving Rex by himself. Now Rex is barely able to fight, but he gets a little lucky and manages to kill both Leguana and the Komodo dragon, but barely survives after losing his hand. as the King Lizard holds a gun to his head, but we don't see what happens next. I doubt that he's going to pull the trigger, but it sounds like he might take Rex hostage or turn him into a member of the League, but more importantly, he still has those weapons to his disposal, so who's going to stop him? Now, we end this episode with the Hive Mind fully aware of the Guardian's presence, and we see him overpowering them. Rudy manages to distract it by affecting his nerve systems, leaving them to killing as many as they can before it gets back. Now, Eve creates another shield while Rudy creates a self-destructive bomb out of his suit, but she's not able to hold on for long, leaving them defenseless, and we end the episode. Now, in the post-credit scenes, we see the return of Alan, who's shocked to learn that he's not dead, and he gets out of his recovering cell. As he's greeted by Thetis, he tells him that he purposely turned off his life support to test the theory if he'll die or if he'll come back stronger than ever, as he calls this a payoff worth his life as he's now able to stand his ground against a Viltrumite. Now, Alan tells him that he doesn't plan on coming across any Viltrumites anytime soon, as it is revealed that Thetis is a Viltrumite, or as he puts it, he's much worse. As he was the only one ever to rebel against the Empire, or at least before the discovery of Invincible, he wants Alan to find him because he's the key to turn the tide of this war.
Tell Thetis that when it's time to attack, when you need someone for the actual fight, I'll be there.
Count on it.
We are here talking Season 2, Part 2, Episode 6 of... We pick up after last week's cliffhanger right as King Lizard has a gun to Rex's head. Now, I didn't think he would do it, but bang, he actually pulls the trigger and shoots Rex right in the head as Rex falls and lays in his own blood. A mind-blowing way to kick off this incredible episode. Now, back in space, the Guardians must protect Rudy after Eve wasn't able to hold on to her protective shield, as we watch each Guardian digs deep to protect them as well as defending their own safety. Now, as it seems there's no way to defeat this hive mind, we see Rudy is about to get engulfed by them, but in the last minute, Shapesmith pulls his own protective shield against the squids to cover Rudy as he completes the suit bomb. Now, this to me was the moment that Shapesmith officially gained their trust and became a Guardian. Now, Eve wakes up just as Rudy bomb is ready, as someone needs to take this directly to the hive mind to stop them, as Immortal immediately takes the lead but is stopped by Invincible as he tells him,
How dare you!
Stop it! I'm stronger and faster than you, and you know it!
Don't fail.
Now, Immortal is tasked with covering Invincible as the others continue to fight, but Shapesmith can't hold any longer, leaving Eve to fend for Rudy alone, as we see some of the squids manage to sneak into her new shield. Now, as Invincible gets closer, he's stopped, but Immortal helps and he's able to set off the bomb to distract his nerve system, and they're able to save Russ, but they turn around to find that Rudy and Eve are now hosts. Now, Invincible suggests that maybe there's some juice left to save them, as they separate them and set off the bomb again, and it works and they're able to rescue them, and they have to leave immediately. Now, back at the missile station, King Lizard makes his demands on the phone, but notices a noise coming from Rex's body as he notices he's still alive. Impressed by Rex's strength to survive, he begins mocking him as Rex just wants him to shut up. In some way, somehow, Rex uses all his power and anger and begins to beat the hell out of King Lizard and holds him up with his good hand and bashes his face in with the bone left on his eaten off hand and throws him on the ground and begins stomping him to death. As the guards enter the room, they ask if Rex is okay, and after the adrenaline has slowed down, we see Rex passes out and taken into recovery, but not before he answers by saying,
Why would you... That's a weird question. I'm fine. Totally good. Ever better? You know me. I'm practically...
Now, I assume he killed King Lizard, but I'm not 100% sure, but either way, that was one of the most brutal and straight up badass moments so far in this show. As for me, this moment of the episode and seeing Rex in action last week has completely changed my perspective on Rex. This dude's arc from being a douchebag turned badass has been great. But this incredible scene isn't over yet, as one of the guards looks over Komodo Dragon's dead body, and surprise, Shrinking Ray is still alive. Now back with the Guardians in space, as they find their way to escape, they're stopped by some high-ranking Martians who tell them that they can leave, but Shapesmith must stay to face his crimes of punishment, and that being death. Now, like any great team, no man is left behind. We watch the Guardians disobey their orders and they fly off. Now, being chased by them, we see Invincible ultimately pulls a Captain Marvel and flies through each ship and destroys them one by one. Now, after seeing this, Invincible is immediately congratulated and hugged by Eve, and you'll notice the response by Invincible, it being one that possibly having a romantic connection with her, something that was hinted at back in season 1 but never was pursued because both characters were involved with other relationships. Now, I think for Mark, Amber hasn't really seen him in action, and he's never really had someone notice his heroic actions before like this. But after this episode, it's safe to assume that their friendship may be becoming something more. Now, it is important to point out that Immortal acknowledged the actions from Invincible, and at the same time, we see Rudy is proud that he was able to control his fear response and changed himself, and as he says, he can do the same for Monster Girl, but she tells him to stop. This relationship between Rudy and Monster Girl shouldn't be overlooked. The buildup has been slow, but I have a feeling that it will have a very great, glorious payoff. Now, to backtrack a bit, the opening 10 minutes of this episode was nothing short of amazing and thrilling and just incredible. One of my favorite openings of this entire series so far. We check in with Debbie and Mark's little brother as Cecil is paying them a visit to let them know that the Guardians successfully completed their mission, but he's also continuing to try to convince her to let him and the GDA take over and let him take care of the little guy. As Debbie reminds him that she raised Mark and look how he turned out, a superhero who saved the world, so he's in good hands. She also brings up the fact that he's Mark's only brother and he's important to him, but also to her because he's family. Now comment below, do you all trust Cecil's intentions? Does he honestly want the best for Debbie and, as he's named later, Oliver? Or does he just want to take Oliver to train him early and to be one of his pawns or contingency plan against any threats on Earth, including Nolan and the Viltrumites? Now at the Pentagon, we see Russ is under their care, and as the morale of the group is up, Eve, Mark, and Black Samsung see Donald sitting there and he looks upset. As they learn what happened with the rest of the Guardians while they were gone, we see Shrinking Ray and Rex are recovering after their surgery, as Immortal is sitting in a dark room with all of Kate's dead bodies as he mourns her. Now, I mentioned it last week how I didn't really have the emotional impact of their deaths because we didn't spend that much time with those characters, but seeing these characters who care for them and knowing they spend time with them and how they've built a bond and honestly they've built a family, their reactions and seeing what happened hit me more than last week's scenes. This scene to me was a great way to create the emotional depth in my opinion. As Mark arrives home and is greeted by his little brother Oliver, whose name comes from Debbie's dad, Oliver is now using words and calls Mark his brother. At the funeral, Immortal speaks of Kate's real superpowers, and it was to help those around her and that she always believed that it was good in this world no matter how many times she died trying to save it. This was something that Immortal learned from Kate, a person who's lived centuries was able to learn something from this person who he connected with more than anyone he's ever met before, as he thought,
I thought we had more time together.
I gotta admit, I like that we get to see more layers of Immortal and seeing our heroes' day-to-day lives and them dealing with loss and seeing the different emotions of what makes them mad, happy, or sad is what makes this show so special. Now, I don't want to glance over this, but most of the second half of this episode focuses on Mark and Amber and both of them acknowledging that the past year or so hasn't been the best and their time at college isn't what they hoped for. They're realizing that Mark's superhero lifestyle is creating a rift between them. As we see Amber goes to talk to Eve for advice about Mark, as Mark gets relationship advice from both Ark and Rex. I really thought that cutting between the two conversations was very creative, and seeing them answering each other's questions through the other person was very effective. Now, speaking of Rex, he talks to Mark about how terrible he was in his past relationships, and he seems to want to turn a new leaf after coming so close to death. But back to Amber and Mark, it seems that they both are realizing that maybe their time as a couple has run its course. Now, if they do inevitably end things, I don't think it's going to be on bad terms, but maybe a decision that they both came to agree with, or in perfect superhero fashion, maybe Amber dies, really opening up that door for him and Eve to actually be together. Now, speaking of complex relationships, we see that Rick is back and William couldn't be happier. Now, it's safe to assume that Rick is a cyborg just like Donald, who, by the way, is still dealing with what he found out last week, and he even mentions how this type of trauma can resurface. I am so intrigued to see if anything goes wrong with this state-of-the-art cyborgs. Meanwhile, Debbie interviews potential babysitters who are spies sent by Cecil, but finds one of them by the name of April. who tells Debbie the truth about her working for the GDA, but reminds Debbie that she's the boss, not Cecil. As we see, Oliver is now calling her mom. Now again, can we trust Cecil? Can we now trust April? Once she maybe gains Debbie's trust, will she make her move to take him straight to Cecil and have him training him, all while she's supposed to be babysitting him? Now, speaking of Cecil, we see he offers Eve a spot back on the Guardians, but she's still not ready to rejoin them quite yet, as she's still figuring out what kind of hero she wants to be. Now, while talking to Art, we see Mark gets his father's sci-fi books. As he reads them over, we get to experience them. We meet who goes by the name of Space Rider in the books, as he's got a very powerful weapon called the Infinity Ray. Now, Speed Racer in the comics was first introduced in issue 35. As we learn in this episode, Speed Racer has an extremely powerful gun that, when fired, has an indestructible blast that can shoot through anything and can also only be shot by him. Now, these blasts are lethal to Viltrumites. Now, Mark also reads Savage Planet, Savage Beast, which is also very key because the Ragnars are extremely powerful and strong, and their planet increases their strength. Now, this was also included in issue 35 as well, as Mark is starting to realize his father's books may be hiding a secret message. Back at the Guardians headquarters, Cecil tries to get Immortal to take a vacation, but he refuses, as they see an unknown object is heading towards Earth, as Immortal takes action because he believes it's Omni-Man. We cut to space and see that it's Alan looking for Mark, but he's greeted by an angry Immortal looking for a fight. Alan tries to avoid this fight, but Immortal won't stop until Invincible steps in and stops it from getting violent. Now, Invincible inevitably convinces Immortal that Alan is a good guy, as they talk about why Alan is here on Earth. Now, in Mark's dorm room, Alan tells him about Theta's true identity, as Mark fills him in on what happened to his dad. Now, in this conversation, Mark also notices how much bigger Alan has gotten since he last saw him, as Alan eventually gets to why he's here on Earth, as he invites Mark to go to space to discuss their war plans against the Viltrumites. But Mark refuses, as he tells him that he just got back from space and he needs to spend some time on Earth to make things right with Amber, but also he wants to be there for his little brother Oliver. Now, while he doesn't go with Alan, he doesn't leave him empty-handed, as he tells him that his father's books are detailed with clues and information on how to hurt the Viltrumites, and Alan scans them and takes this information back with him to share with Thetis. Now, I would imagine that Thetis and the other Viltrumites are already aware of their vulnerabilities or their weaknesses, but maybe over time they become so powerful and resilient they stop passing down how they can get hurt to future generations, because they couldn't imagine ever losing or one of their own using their weaknesses against them. As Alan leaves, Mark tells him,
When you need someone for the actual fight, I'll be there.
As we end this episode, we see this prison in space housing what I assume to be some dangerous individuals, and one of them look like battle beasts who I can't wait to make their return, but we see one of them is Nolan. Now the question is, why is Nolan still alive? As we hear a general who goes by General Craig in the comics but goes by General Krieg in the show, he explains their ways.
In order for a Viltrumite to be executed, he must be healed and whole, worthy to stand and face the end of his life with honor, even if his crime was devoid of it. Yet for even such a craven betrayal, there is a path to redemption.
We see Nolan gets offered to rejoin his people, but doesn't respond. Now this obviously upsets the general, as he says,
The planet and its people are toxic. If they could do this to you, they too will pay.
Will we inevitably see Nolan fight back and try to escape? As we end this episode back on Earth with Russ cleaning his apartment, as he begins choking as he spits up a squid and it reattaches itself to him and reconnects the bond, as their plan to invade Earth is back on. Our post-credit scenes show Angstrom getting fitted for a new suit as he's prepared to visit an old friend. As we watch him walking through the different multiverses, one of them is a reference to the creator's Robert Kirkman most popular universe in The Walking Dead, as he arrives and says,
It is good to be home.
Killing you is not my task. But soon, another will come. And if he finds you still resistant to your destiny, he will demonstrate the error of your ways, and this whole planet will pay the price. I pray you come to your senses before then.
We are here talking Season 2, Part 2, Episode 7 of... We open with Amber and Mark attending Comic-Con as Mark has a very meta moment and sees fans of his dressed as Invincible. We see Mark wants to make sure that Amber is cool with them spending their alone time together doing something that he likes, but she assures him that she's fine because at least they're together. But speaking of meta moments, or more of being self-aware of the fans, we see Mark waiting in a long line to meet the writer of Seance Dog, and he asks the writer when's the next season coming back, and he tells Mark,
I mean, the show? Probably not for another year. Sorry, animation takes a long time.
Now this is clearly a reference to the wait between seasons 1 and 2 of Invincible, and the fans like myself getting impatient, from the covering of the mouth to the back of the head to the wide angle shot to the different style of animations. All this was just hilarious. Now, just as Amber was getting ready to pick something that she's interested in, Mark gets a call, and it's not from Cecil, but instead it's from Eve. She needs Mark's help in finding Rex, who snuck out of the hospital to do a mission. Now Mark agrees to find him, and Amber plays it off like it's okay to leave her by herself with all of his stuff. Now I gotta admit, I felt bad for Amber, and while I know Rex is becoming a fan favorite, at least for me, I don't think Mark leaving her to find him is worth causing more trouble in their relationship. As we cut to the mission at the nuclear storage facility, we see Rex isn't 100% yet and he's struggling to calm his nerves, as he tries to hype himself up to play down the enemy, Octobos, who first appeared in issue 25. Now Octobos has attempted to learn the human language, but his vocabulary isn't great, and once Rex hears him mashing words together incorrectly, he loosens up and doesn't take him too seriously. As we watch Rex gaining his confidence back and he's winning this fight, he underestimates his opponent and gets slammed to the ground. But in perfect timing, in comes Invincible, who knocks him out. Now Invincible offers to take care of the rest, but Rex wants to finish what he started because he needs his win to get back to its old ways. As Invincible takes out the others, Rex is completely out of his normal arsenal and uses his brand new hand with a brand new weapon and takes out Octobos immediately. Now after calling in the cleanup crew, we see Rex jokingly mentions how he only had a couple options. One was to get back into action or open up a bar, aka retiring from being a hero, as Mark can relate, as he says that he was thinking about quitting as well after his one-sided battle against his dad. As Mark tells Rex that he left Amber to help him, we see Rex promises to make it up to him by having the Guardians cover for him whenever he wants, something we see later in this very episode. Speaking of the Guardians, we cut to Rudy trying to convince Amanda to use his technology to fight via VR and inserting a chip inside of her head instead of transforming into Monster Girl and aging normally. But again, his approach isn't working and she doesn't want to be fixed, as he puts it. I just have this feeling that we're going to see Monster Girl get badly injured sometime later down the road, leaving Rudy to doing what he wants to, which is fixing her his way. We finally get a chance to hear from Bulletproof, who's talking to Samsung about how flawed the team is, even though they're supposed to be the best in the world. As we watch him go one by one with every member of the team and makes a great point about their issues that nobody seems to want to address head on. As Samsung agrees that they're not the best, but they're family, and they're unbeatable when it counts. But this family might need a new leader, as we cut to Immortal talking to Cecil about quitting. Now Cecil refuses his request, as Immortal tells him that he's on edge and he's unstable and not fit to be in position on this team, let alone leading them. Immortal reminds Cecil how he almost cost him a defeat on Mars and almost went to war against Alan. He says he was already close to the ledge, but Kate was the thing that pushed him off. As Cecil tells him that he's not quitting, but grants him temporary leave, as Immortal tells him he's going home. Meanwhile, Cecil calls in Rudy to let him know that he's going to be his replacement. As we see Rick is suffering from nightmares from what happened to him at the hands of Sinclair, and I'll be honest with you all, I don't really care for this particular side plot, but I'll admit in this scene, I felt bad for Rick, and when he said to William,
"Don't know what's worse, Claire taking me apart or those doctors putting me back together."
Not entirely sure what the long game is right now, but I can see Rick and Donald coming together and teaming up to reclaiming their lives that they lost. As we actually immediately cut to Donald, who, like Immortal, wants to quit, see Donald mentions Cecil erasing his memories, but learns that it wasn't his decision. As Cecil sits him down and shows some secret footage of Donald's past lives, as he watches all the times he's died and saving and defending others, being a real hero. As we learn, the original Donald okayed the decision to be remade and brought back whenever he died, and to erase his memories so that he can continue to save lives no matter the cost. As he tells Cecil to erase his memories again, he gets a call from William. Now back with Amber and Mark, we watch as he prepares to make the case to his dean about his whereabouts. As Mark is surprised to learn that his dean is his old principal who knows about his past excuses of his absences from high school. As we watch the dean cut him a break because he knows what happened to his father and he gives him an ultimatum. But it's a layered one because if you notice, this very conversation is not only about school, but Mark also takes his advice and applies it to what's going on with his relationship with Amber. Either he commits or break things off, he's got to make a decision, as the dean tells him that he has a month to prove himself in school. As Debbie is finally getting back in her groove at work, but also getting her groove back romantically as she agrees to go on a date with her co-worker Paul. As new babysitter April lets Debbie know how quickly Oliver is learning, but she tells her that his powers haven't kicked in quite yet, and even if they're not guaranteed to come, if they do appear, it'll be much faster than it was with Mark. Now, sticking with the Grayson home life, we see Mark talking to his mom about his relationship issues with Amber. He asks her what life was like when she was dating his dad, as she mentions how things were so much fun when they first met, as Debbie was the one who actually taught him about Earth. Now, even though things sounded great, she tells him that dating a superhero has its perks, but it was also a very lonely life. And she felt that way because no one would be gone for long periods of time, even though she had Mark at her side. As she relates how she was raising Mark to what's going on currently with her looking after Oliver, she couldn't imagine life without Mark or Oliver, and she doesn't regret meeting Nolan. And seeing all this stuff with Mark, Debbie, and Oliver is really setting the stage for a very awkward family reunion. Meanwhile, we see Rick is on a literal edge as William called Donald for help. Rick feels broken inside and doesn't know anyone who can understand what he's going through till we see Donald reveals that he's a cyborg as well. He also tells him that he's died 39 times and that he's 98% machine. Donald wished that he didn't have his memories erased, and he says one of the most heartbreaking lines of this entire episode.
We're not our bodies. We're the decisions we make, the lives we change, the people we love, or who love us. I don't need to forget that. And neither do you.
This to me is a perfect example of how this show just continues to have characters like William, Rick, and even Donald who don't have a ton of screen time, but manage to give them an earnest moment like this and makes the points hit home of overarching messages such a beautiful scene. Now, calling back to that favor earlier in the episode, we see Mark cashes in that favor as the Guardians will be covering for him on his date night with Amber, and he even convinced Cecil to give him 2 nights off. As we see Amber could be happier with his decision to finally making time for her as we see them travel across the city together for a date night. Now, just when things are going great, they're having a good time, they're talking about vacationing in Hawaii and studying to get his grades up, it's time for an actual reality check as we're finally introduced to Anissa, a brutal and terrifying agent of the Viltrumite Empire, as she introduced herself by putting her hand around Amber's neck and threatening to kill her if he doesn't come with her. Now, Anissa was introduced in issue 44, in which this was a very similar introduction to her, but instead of Amber, it was Debbie. This is a character who's made her presence felt immediately in this show, and this is just the beginning. As she wants to talk somewhere alone, we see Mark bargains with her to meet in the sky, and she accepts, but not before threatening to what he would do if she doesn't show up. As Mark rushes home to get his suit, he calls Cecil as they listen in preparation to avoid another Chicago incident. Anissa tells Mark that she just wants to talk and she's not here to battle. As she talks about how they've been studying Earth and how they have less than an 18% chance of surviving the next 2 centuries without loss of billions of lives because of their own doing. Anissa lays out the ways in which the Viltrumites can provide the much needed resources, but it requires them to surrender completely to them. As Cecil learns the small chance that Mark has against her, as he calls in Sinclair to see how many robots can be ready for action, but unfortunately none of them are prepared. Now, quick side note, just in case anyone was wondering, but back in season 1, Ezra Miller voiced Sinclair, but unless you've been under a rock, you might know that they were involved in a ton of controversy, but luckily they found an incredible voice actor to replace them, and that is Eric Bauza. Meanwhile, Cecil's losing his head over what he can do with this surprise visit of a Viltrumite. He immediately finds out that there's something approaching Earth. As he takes this opportunity to prove that Anissa's words of not taking pleasure in killing humans to the test, as he tells Mark to have her join him in taking down this incoming kaiju threat. As she agrees to join him, but also witness his strength. As Mark starts off the battle winning by throwing some really heavy punches, he inevitably gets knocked into the distance, leaving the humans on board lives in the balance. As Mark is literally caught between a rock and a hard place, Anissa takes this opportunity as a way to show him how it is done as she flies into the face of this kaiju, killing it within seconds and not even breaking a sweat, but just briefly getting his blood on herself. As Anissa helps bring the ship ashore, as she reveals that she knew Cecil was listening all along, as she tells him she noticed how much he cares for Earth. But this very action in which she had to step in must make it very clear on why the Viltrumites must intervene. As she tells Mark that he must
be the Viltrumite you're supposed to be. Be your father's son.
But Mark refuses to be his father's son, and that humans need to make their own decisions even if they're wrong. As Mark takes it upon himself to tell Anissa that he believes it's her time to leave, and he starts to get into a fighting position as Cecil warns him what he's up against, as she tells him,
remember that we started with reason.
And gives him an uppercut from hell and knocks him into the heavens only to knock him right back down. Now we see Mark tries to get his licks in, but barely makes a difference as she catches one of his punches and punches him into the ship because she's mad that he interrupted his education, as we get a great callback to Mark saying that he's a terrible student. As Cecil watches this, he goes to Donald and wonders what they can throw at her, but learns that she's just as fast as Nolan. But Donald lets him know that there is another option. That option being that Mark tell her that he'll complete his mission just so she can leave. But we all know how stubborn Mark can be, which is a good trait to be a superhero, as he refuses and continues to get his ass handed to him, and she throws him into the ground so hard that it breaks the ground. She gives him one last chance to show he can learn. But Mark takes what he learned from the dean and gives her an ultimatum: either kill him or show him how much he's really needed, as he tells her to make up her mind. As Mark starts to fade into unconsciousness, she lifts her foot off his throat and tells him that killing him wasn't her task. But soon enough, another Viltrumite will return and won't be as merciful. As she prays he'll come to his senses by then, as she flies into space. Again, this is just a tease of what we can expect to see, and I'm telling you all right now, when we see part 2 of them coming together again, it will be something you will never forget, but this was an incredible first impression. Now, I want to point out, while left beaten to almost death yet again by a Viltrumite, it is important to note that he managed to survive yet again, proving that he really is invincible. As Cecil checks in on Mark, Mark reminds him that words hold power. That being why he couldn't say that he'll let them do something deep down knowing wasn't true. As Cecil tells him that their agreed upon nights off wasn't going to no longer be an option because they need to be better prepared for the inevitable return of the Viltrumites. As Mark goes to check in on Amber, and she's still in shock and realizes how close to death she was, as she's about to make a decision for the both of them. She tells Mark that she's not built like him. She has no control over what he does while being a hero, and that her life matters too, and more importantly, her life can be used as a weapon against him. As Mark responds by saying that he can't cross the line and getting closer to becoming his father, and he can't lie like his dad did to his mom when he would tell her that everything's okay. As their time as a couple has come to an end, as they seem to have come to an agreement that this can't work anymore. As Amber realizes that she can't live in his world. As their time as a couple appears to have come to an end and they have officially broken up. As we end with Mark getting a call from his mom, but it's not his mom. Instead, it's Angtram, who's paying a visit to that old friend he was talking about in the last week post-credit scene, as he has his mom and Oliver hostage and says,
"When are you coming home?"
Man, I feel terrible for Mark. After getting his ass whooped, after getting broken up, now this. As our post-credits show Anissa returning to the general to learn that she's failed, as she tells him that Mark's poisoned just like Nolan, as an alert comes in. And an alert happens to be our favorite alien Alan, who hopes that he wasn't seen by the radar, but is greeted by a super uppercut by Anissa. But to Alan's surprise, his head is still attached, proving that he is indeed stronger than ever, as he throws his own punch, which draws blood, surprising both characters by his strength. As she tries to catch Alan because she wants to know where this new strength has come from. Now, Anissa eventually catches him, but we see that Alan puts a smile on, letting us know that this is a part of some type of plan. Now, I think it's safe to assume that Alan wanted to get caught because he wanted to get thrown into his prison in hope to come across a Viltrumite, that Viltrumite having the name of Nolan, and he wants to convince him to join the fight.
I thought you were stronger.
We are here talking the finale of Season 2, Part 2 of... We open in a red room covered in smoke as we watch these robots get dismantled one by Nolan. Some guards enter the room and start blasting their weapons. They manage to take Nolan out, or at least they think they did, as Nolan's eyes open and he takes them out with ease. As Nolan speaks his first words of part 2, as the general walks in and is impressed, as he tells him that he's passed his inspections and finally ready for his execution, as they must be at peak form before they're executed. Cut to a random man running as he's trying to hype himself up as we see Mark arriving home after receiving the call from Angstrom in last episode's final scene, as we'll notice that the title card is fully cracked and completely blue. Mark runs inside, ready for a fight, as Angstrom's hands are on his mother's neck, threatening to snap it if he comes any closer. As he mocks Mark about being a potential risk taker as he blocks all signals within the house, including in Mark's earpiece. Angstrom tells Mark that his identity is public in more than half the realities he exists in, which explains how he knew about Debbie. As Mark is clueless to who this villain is until he shows him what he did to him last time they saw each other, as Mark says,
I didn't do anything to you. Your machine blew up. You need help. Let me just...
I had help!
In anger, he throws Debbie and Oliver to the ground and antagonizes Mark to get him as he tries to attack him, but he's not fast enough as he's thrown into another reality. As Mark finds himself in a reality where dinosaurs are able to talk and argue about who's going to eat him before he's taken back into his reality, where Angstrom is holding Oliver as he admires his purple skin. Angstrom tells Mark that he has no intentions of killing them as long as he doesn't determine the only way to hurt Mark is through them, as he tosses Oliver with no regards to him getting hurt as Debbie catches him. As Mark tries to get Angstrom again, but he's tossed into another reality and one that looks quite familiar. As we see an individual with metal arms like Doc Ock as he fights against a person dressed as a spider who has webs coming out of his hands. Now Mark apologizes for knocking out the Doc Ock lookalike as the hero tries to explain he's traveled to different realities before as well, and that he's the good guy as the bad guy grabs Mark and he's brought back home. Now, it was rumored for a long time that we would see a Spider-Man cameo this season because they do have a crossover in the comics. Now, while he's never referred to as Spider-Man, the credits have him under Agent Spider, a persona Peter once had in the comics. As Angstrom brings Mark back, he threatens to send Debbie and Oliver to another reality, one in which they would instantly die as Mark tries to reason with him. Angstrom throws Mark into a portal in disbelief of the idea of him trying to save Mark because he doesn't remember it happening that way, as the memories from his own experiences and others start to come in. He sees the night of the explosion, to seeing the last time he saw his reality's Mark, to another Angstrom witnessing his Mark kill his son right in front of him, to seeing him lose his wife, and more times of Invincible murdering his family or loved ones, but always leaving him alive to witness it. Now, we'll be discussing this later in the breakdown, but I wish there was more scenes sprinkled throughout the season of showing Angstrom going through this pain. As Mark returns and has Angstrom in his grips, but lets him go and tells him that he can take his best shot at him as long as he lets his family go. As we watch Angstrom throw a knife at Debbie and we watch Mark fly through another portal. Now, while Mark is in another familiar location, which seems to be the world of The Walking Dead, which we saw a brief cameo in the post-credit scenes of episode 5, we cut to Debbie, who takes this opportunity to attack Angstrom. As she tries to escape, but he pulls Mark back in and almost crashes into her, but instead gets caught in another portal. As Debbie learns that the other Debbies in the other universes actually join Nolan and Mark in their murdering of millions. But Debbie lets him know that she's the only Debbie that raised Mark to define Nolan and save the world, and points out the differences of the other situations and that he's no killer. As she actually brings up the fact that this reality is where Mark is a true hero and Angstrom is actually the villain. Clearly upset to hear this, we see him slamming Debbie into a table as he screams he's not the villain as he proceeds to break her arm. As we watch Oliver crying in fear as Angstrom grabs him and says,
I'm going to make your son hurt. I'm gonna make you hurt. I'm even gonna make this child hurt.
Man, I was secretly thinking that what if Oliver's powers came in at this exact moment, even though he wasn't sure how to use them? That would have been a great moment for that character to actually get his lick back on Angstrom. Meanwhile, we cut to Mark, who's talking to these random individuals about him multiverse hopping, as we see familiar places and faces, including Batman, as he continues to go from one portal to another. As Mark surprises Angstrom, who pops his head in one of the portals, and yet again we watch Mark has him in his possession. As he looks over and sees his mom is beaten and has a broken arm, he completely loses it and flies him into the ground, which reminded me so much of the scene of Superman and Man of Steel. As we watch, Angstrom isn't damaged by this, but instead he overpowers Mark and pushes him as he tells him that he's got an upgrade from different doctors across the multiverse. As we watch him beat Mark through different portals into the different multiverses. As Mark finally has had enough of Angstrom threatening his family again and begins to get the literal upper hand, and he tells him how much he's been holding back, that he knows nothing about him, and we see Mark let loose. Filled with anger and frustration, Mark continues to punch Angstrom and not holding back, and he gets him a final blow at killing Angstrom. But more importantly, killing someone for the very first time, as he has no way back home. As we watch, Mark says,
I thought you were stronger.
Now back in the reality, Cecil and the team arrive to take care of Debbie's wounds as she's concerned about Oliver, but also about Mark's location. As we watch Mark trying to reason with himself on why he had to kill Angstrom, Mark admits that he lost control and he wanted to kill him but didn't know if he can do it. Mark is having what I consider to be a mental breakdown as he doesn't know who he is or where he is, as he begins crying, but then it turns into laughs after he realizes,
I kinda won.
Meanwhile, Nolan is getting beaten as he wants to stand on his own 2 feet. As we watch Nolan walk towards his cell, we see Alan's plans are starting to come into fruition as they lock eyes and they see each other, and they begin to speak through Alan's ways of communicating secretly as Alan lets Nolan know that he's here for him. Back with Mark, who's now talking to himself and tries to avoid the fact that he killed someone, he tries to find a way out of this unknown location. As he thinks that maybe Angstrom has something on him that can get him out of here, in comes what appears to be the Guardians from another universe, but also include Knockout and Thorman. As we learn that they're a much older version of the Guardians that we know, as they fill Mark in on what happened because they actually come from his reality but 20 years into the future, where Invincible has been missing. Now luckily enough time has passed that they have invented a time machine, and the missing time of Invincible hasn't been good for their planet. This robot mentions that they can't reveal too much because it can disrupt the time stream. As they open up a portal for Mark to return to his reality, we see Mark is relieved as Robot tells him that he did manage to return at some point, but he wouldn't like who he became. As we watch Mark start to enter the portal, we see Eve confesses her love to him and wishes she had said something sooner, and she wants him to tell present-day Eve how he feels about her. Even if he doesn't love her, tell her how he feels. As he enters, it's revealed that it's not Rudy under the mask, but it's actually Rex, as he tells her,
I suppose you weren't paying attention when we discussed not damaging the time stream.
Shut up, Rex.
As Mark returns and gets a message from Cecil before almost revealing his powers to the public. Now at the Pentagon, he learns that his mom is doing better and Oliver is fine. Mark and Debbie hug as they're happy to see each other, as she asks if this is all over as he begins to cry, as she's acknowledging that he had to kill Angstrom to end this. As Mark tries to get some alone time, he's visited by Cecil as he tells him he crossed a line, and also tells Cecil,
You're not your dad, Mark.
You weren't there. I lost it. I just lost it. I crossed the line, Cecil, and I...
You didn't cross the line. You kept your mom and your brother safe. End of story.
Now back at the Guardians headquarters, Rudy tries again to convince Amanda that he can fix her, but he does his best at explaining he wants to help, but not in a robot way, as she acknowledges his effort. As they eventually agree to go on another date. As we cut to Immortal who's at home, we see that he's greeted by Kate. She let him know that she kept this a hidden secret from everyone. As she tells Immortal that she was thinking about becoming someone else, but she didn't because of him, as they embrace each other and all things are forgiven. Now a bit of a random scene here as we cut to the desert where 2 women, one having superpowers, come across a tomb, the same one that we saw back in season 1 in episode 4. As we watch them get trapped inside, and one of them sees their dad's lifeless body, as the mummy arises in disappointment that they're women and not men that he can take control over, but this is interrupted by Mark flying in the sky. Now this mummy seems to be some type of inside joke because I don't know if this mummy is in the comics. Let me know what you all think about that and if you think this mummy will have a bigger role in season 3. As we watch Mark fly in the sky, he's getting flashbacks to the time where he wanted to be just like his dad. We also cut back to the moment where his dad beat him almost to death, as we also see him telling Cecil that he's not his dad, also including the last time that he saw his dad. As we watch Mark fly faster than we ever seen before, as he sees the blood left on his hands from killing Angstrom. As he makes a stop to looking at Amber in the sky, but he avoids her as she looks up to see if he was there. As we cut to Debbie and Mark's house getting remodeled, inside everything looks brand new, but we can see that both Debbie and Mark are broken inside and out, as Debbie just wants to get back to some type of regular routine. Now later that night, we see them having a conversation as she acknowledges that things will never be the same again. As Mark tells his mom that he's quitting school because there's no point. Based on the things he can do, he can't waste his time trying to have a normal life, and he's got to do better at controlling himself, and this is the most important thing he can do. As we end this finale with Mark paying a visit to Eve, Eve tells him that she's always there if he needs her, as he puts his hand closer to her and begins to tell her something, but he stops. As she looks at Mark and tells him that he doesn't deserve this, as they lean on one another. As our post-credit scenes cut back to the prison where Alan speaks to Nolan about knowing what happened on Threxa and that he's spoken to Mark. Nolan wants Mark to have nothing to do with this, as he lets him know that he has to pay for his own crimes. As Nolan says that he's no longer a Viltrumite anymore and regrets the pain and the destruction he caused back on Earth. As Nolan feels that he deserves what's coming to him, but
I think I miss my wife.
Now, while this episode has some great character moments of Mark and seeing everything that he's going through with killing Engstrom and the whole emotional depths that he's going with his mom, I gotta say, I'm a little bit slightly disappointed with this finale. Now, I've always gave this show credit of not only fleshing out its main characters, but also supporting characters, but the biggest issue I have with this finale and this season in general is Engstrom wasn't a fully fledged character, but instead he was just a villain to serve as a plot device for Mark to kill. While we spent the first episode learning a little bit about Engstrom and we had various post-credit scenes checking in with him, this episode gave us a little bit more backstory explaining his pain, but I wish the show would have explained that and really dove deeper into that as the season went through. Versus what we got in this finale, which to me was rushed in having his character arc and not really feeling the depths of the emotion that the character went through. And if I'm also giving some criticism of this finale, I felt the pacing was a little bit off. We had these random tonal issues from the mummy joke that just came out of nowhere. I also felt that the emotional beats with Rudy and Amanda and Immortal and Kate didn't feel as earned as I hope it would have been. So while I might have been slightly disappointed with this finale, I did also still enjoy this second half of season 2 of Invincible. Witnessing our characters like Mark, Nolan, Debbie, and many others facing themselves on who they really want to be and can they fix themselves from their past. Which was beautifully handled with Mark going through this season of him not becoming his dad and not becoming the killer, but ultimately being faced to do so and killing Engstrom. Of course, the action is always on point with this show, and I love the character development, but like I said, I just wish that the main villain, Engstrom, wasn't missing for more than half of the season to really make this emotional ending have a payoff. And if I were to compare the previous finales, I still think season 1 has the best finale of this show so far, followed by the part 1 of season 2 finale, then followed by this one. This will end my recap and breakdown of episode 8. If you are interested in seeing my first time watching live reactions to watching the standout moments of this episode, you can find those reactions in the description of this very video. I really appreciate you all watching today's breakdown. If you could, hit the like button, share your thoughts on this episode and this season 2 part 2 as a whole, as well as what you all hope to see in season 3. Also consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel. You all are awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.